My father disowned me for marrying below my status, and 10 years later he needed my signature to save his company. I remember the exact moment his voice went cold, colder than I had ever heard it during 26 years of my life. We stood in his study, surrounded by leather books he never read, while I told him I was marrying Daniel Reyes. He asked what Daniel did for a living, and when I said mechanic, his jaw tightened like a closing fist. I grew up in that house on Windermere Lane, where marble floors echoed every footstep like a constant reminder of wealth. My father, Robert Whitfield, built his company from nothing, and he never let anyone forget that impressive, exhausting fact. My mother passed away when I was 14, leaving my father colder, sharper, and more obsessed with legacy than before. Growing up, I learned that love in our house came wrapped tightly around expectations, achievements, and appearances that never wavered. I attended the right schools, wore the right clothes, and dated exactly the kind of men my father approved of completely. Then I met Daniel at a small coffee shop downtown, and everything I thought I wanted quietly began changing forever. He fixed cars for a living, laughed easily, and never once asked what my father's company was worth financially. For the first time, someone loved me without calculating what I could offer them in return eventually. I kept our relationship secret for 8 months, terrified of disappointing a father who measured love through achievement alone. Eventually, secrets became impossible to maintain, especially once Daniel proposed, and I said yes without hesitation whatsoever. I told my father over dinner, expecting disappointment, but never expecting the complete, permanent rejection that followed immediately after. He said marrying Daniel would embarrass our family name, undoing decades of careful reputation building within our elite social circles. I reminded him that love mattered more than reputation, but he simply stared at me like a stranger. He said if I married Daniel, I would no longer be welcome inside this house or inside his life anymore. I thought he was bluffing, using anger the way he always had, hoping fear would force me back into obedience. I married Daniel anyway, in a small backyard ceremony filled with laughter, warmth, and genuine, uncomplicated happiness completely. My father did not attend, did not call, and did not send even a single word acknowledging my wedding day. That silence hurt more than any cruel words he could have possibly chosen to say instead. I told myself I had made the right choice, even as grief for my father quietly settled into my chest. Daniel held me that night, promising we would build something real, something neither of us needed permission to enjoy. We moved into a small apartment above his auto shop, filled with mismatched furniture and secondhand dishes we loved anyway. Money was tight those first years, but our laughter-filled rooms, my childhood home, never once managed to fill. I took a job as a receptionist, then slowly worked my way toward managing a small local marketing firm eventually. Daniel expanded his auto shop, hiring 2 employees, building something honest with his hands every single day. We had our daughter, Lily, 3 years into marriage, and I finally understood love without conditions attached completely. I sent my father a photo of Lily, hoping distance might have softened whatever anger still separated us. He never responded, and eventually I stopped hoping silence would ever transform into something resembling reconciliation. Extended family occasionally mentioned him, saying he seemed thinner, quieter, more consumed by work than ever before. I told myself I did not care, though some quiet part of me always secretly did. 5 years passed, then 6, then 7, each year building distance that felt increasingly permanent and impossible to bridge. Daniel's business grew steadily, and eventually we bought a modest house with a garden Lily loved running through happily. I built my own small marketing agency, proud of accomplishments that belonged entirely to me instead of my father's legacy. I stopped measuring my worth through his approval, learning instead to measure it through genuine happiness and hard work. Then, 10 years after that final dinner, my phone rang with a number I recognized instantly despite years apart. It was my father's assistant, Margaret, asking politely whether I could meet Robert Whitfield at his office soon. My hands trembled holding the phone, uncertain whether hope or dread was the stronger emotion rising inside me. I agreed to the meeting, curiosity outweighing years of carefully protected emotional distance I had built deliberately. Walking into his office building felt surreal, like stepping backward into a life I had intentionally left behind. My father looked older, grayer, his once imposing presence now carrying visible exhaustion he could not quite hide anymore. He greeted me formally, offering coffee instead of an apology, treating this reunion like another business transaction entirely. I sat across from him, waiting, refusing to fill silence with forgiveness he had not yet earned properly. He finally admitted his company was struggling, facing bankruptcy unless certain financial restructuring happened within the next 30 days. I asked why this concerned me, since I had built an entirely separate life without his money or involvement. He explained that my grandfather's original trust required my signature to release specific shares needed for refinancing approval. I sat stunned, realizing my grandfather had apparently protected something for me long before I understood its significance. My father explained that without my signature, the company would collapse, taking hundreds of employee jobs down with it. I asked why he never mentioned this trust before, and his expression shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my direct question completely. He admitted he had hoped to resolve the financial crisis without ever needing to contact me at all. That admission stung deeply, confirming he had only reached out because circumstances forced him into reluctant necessity. I told him I needed time to think, refusing to make hasty decisions under emotional or financial pressure again. He seemed frustrated, reminding me that time was limited, that employees depended on this restructuring succeeding quickly. I left his office feeling overwhelmed, torn between old wounds and genuine concern for innocent, hardworking employees involved. That night, I told Daniel everything, watching his expression shift between concern, anger, and cautious protective instinct simultaneously. He reminded me gently that I owed my father nothing, regardless of whatever guilt old wounds still triggered. I agreed, yet something deeper pulled me toward understanding this situation more thoroughly before making any final decision. I contacted my grandfather's old lawyer, requesting copies of the original trust documents my father had briefly mentioned. The lawyer, Harold Simmons, seemed surprised I finally called, saying he had wondered when I might eventually reach out. He explained my grandfather had specifically protected 15% ownership for me, separate entirely from my father's direct control. That percentage, Harold explained, was significant enough to influence major company decisions requiring my formal, documented approval. I asked why my grandfather structured things this way, and Harold said he never fully trusted my father's judgment. Apparently, my grandfather worried Robert prioritized ambition over people, a concern that clearly proved painfully accurate over time. I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness, realizing my grandfather had quietly protected me from a distance. Harold mentioned my grandfather passed instructions insisting I understand my full rights before signing anything my father requested. I spent days reviewing financial documents, learning my father had taken increasingly risky loans over recent business years. The deeper I researched, the clearer it became that mismanagement, not simple bad luck, caused this current crisis. I discovered my father had also quietly diverted company funds toward failed personal investments without proper board approval. This discovery complicated everything, transforming a simple family request into something resembling serious corporate and ethical accountability questions. I met with Harold again, asking whether these financial decisions constituted something legally actionable against my father directly. He confirmed certain transactions appeared questionable, potentially breaching fiduciary responsibilities owed to shareholders and company employees alike. I realized my signature carried more power than my father had originally implied during our brief, guarded conversation. Without my approval, the refinancing could not proceed, meaning I effectively controlled whether his company survived or collapsed. That realization felt heavy, carrying responsibility toward employees who had nothing to do with our complicated family history. I decided I would not simply sign blindly, nor would I refuse simply out of lingering personal resentment either. I requested a formal meeting with the full board, insisting my father attend alongside company executives and legal representatives. My father seemed surprised by my sudden assertiveness, clearly expecting quiet compliance rather than careful, informed negotiation. I told him I needed complete transparency regarding company finances before considering signing anything related to his business. He resisted initially, insisting family matters should remain private, away from formal boardroom scrutiny and documentation. I reminded him that 10 years of silence had already erased whatever informal family trust once existed between us. Reluctantly, he agreed to the meeting, perhaps recognizing he had no genuine leverage remaining in this situation anymore. I spent the following week preparing thoroughly, reviewing every document Harold provided with meticulous, determined attention to detail. Daniel supported me throughout, reminding me nightly that strength meant protecting truth, not simply seeking personal revenge. I also researched employee testimonials, discovering many long-term workers feared losing pensions promised decades before this crisis emerged. Their stories reminded me this situation extended far beyond wounded family pride or 10 years of painful, guarded distance. I decided my decision needed to protect these employees first, regardless of whatever complicated feelings I still carried privately. The night before the meeting, I barely slept, rehearsing exactly what I planned to say clearly and firmly. Daniel held my hand across the kitchen table, reminding me that whatever happened, our family remained solid and secure. Lily, now 7 years old, asked innocently why Grandpa never visited us, and I struggled finding an honest answer. I told her sometimes grown-ups make mistakes they struggle understanding, hoping someday things might genuinely improve between us. The morning of the meeting arrived, and I dressed carefully, choosing confidence over the nervous uncertainty churning inside me. I walked into that boardroom, the same one I remembered visiting as a child, feeling entirely transformed inside. My father sat at the head of the table, flanked by lawyers, executives, and years of unspoken tension surrounding everyone. I sat directly across from him, Harold beside me, documents organized carefully within a leather folder prepared thoroughly. The meeting began formally, with executives explaining the company's financial situation using careful, measured, corporate language throughout. I listened patiently, waiting for the appropriate moment to address concerns Harold and I had identified together previously. When given the opportunity to speak, I asked directly about the questionable personal investments diverted from company funds. The room fell silent, and my father's face flushed slightly, clearly uncomfortable facing this scrutiny publicly and formally. He tried deflecting, blaming market volatility, but I calmly presented documentation contradicting his carefully constructed explanation completely. Several board members exchanged uncomfortable glances, realizing they had also been unaware of these troubling financial decisions. I explained that signing my shares over required specific conditions protecting employee pensions and ensuring transparent, accountable leadership moving forward. My father argued this overstepped normal business boundaries, but the board's legal counsel confirmed my conditions were entirely reasonable. I proposed an independent financial oversight committee, ensuring future decisions required broader approval instead of unilateral control. My father resisted initially, insisting this undermined his authority, built painstakingly over decades of dedicated, exhausting work. I reminded him that authority without accountability had already brought this company dangerously close to complete financial collapse. Several board members quietly nodded, clearly recognizing the validity behind concerns I had carefully researched and presented. The room remained tense as my father struggled reconciling pride with the practical necessity of accepting genuine oversight. I told him honestly, in front of everyone, that I was not doing this out of lingering resentment. I explained I was doing this because employees deserved protection, and integrity mattered more than preserving wounded pride. His expression softened slightly, something resembling genuine reflection crossing his face for the first time in years. After a lengthy discussion, the board agreed to my proposed conditions, recognizing they offered the company's most realistic path forward. My father remained silent for a long moment before finally, quietly agreeing to the terms I had presented. I signed the necessary documents, releasing my shares under conditions ensuring transparency, accountability, and genuine employee protection moving forward. As the meeting ended, executives thanked me individually, relief visible across faces that had carried quiet worry for months. My father lingered afterward, waiting until the room emptied before finally approaching me directly and privately. He said thank you quietly, his voice lacking its usual commanding confidence, sounding smaller than I ever remembered. I told him this did not erase 10 years of silence, but it proved I still valued honesty deeply. He nodded, admitting he had been wrong, not just about Daniel, but about measuring worth through status alone. I asked why it took a financial crisis for him to finally acknowledge mistakes he had made years earlier. He admitted fear, pride, and stubbornness kept him from reaching out sooner, even during quiet moments of genuine regret. I told him healing would require more than one meeting, more than one apology delivered under financial pressure. He asked cautiously whether he might someday meet Daniel and Lily, his voice carrying genuine uncertainty rather than entitlement. I said that possibility existed, but only if his actions demonstrated real change over meaningful time, not empty promises. Walking out of that building, I felt lighter, as though 10 years of unresolved weight had finally loosened slightly. Daniel met me outside, searching my face carefully before asking softly how the meeting had truly gone. I told him everything, watching relief and quiet pride settle across his expression as I explained each detail. That evening, we sat together as a family, and I finally allowed myself to imagine cautious future possibilities. Over the following months, my father implemented the Oversight Committee, communicating regularly regarding company changes and employee protections. He requested small, low-pressure meetings starting with coffee, avoiding any expectation of immediate forgiveness or forced reconciliation. I agreed cautiously, understanding rebuilding trust required patience, consistency, and actions matching whatever words he now offered. Slowly, he began asking about Lily, listening genuinely instead of steering conversations back toward business or personal achievement. 6 months later, he asked if he could meet Daniel, and I finally said yes, cautiously testing this fragile progress. Their meeting was awkward initially, filled with careful, measured conversation between two men who once represented opposing worlds. By the end of dinner, my father complimented Daniel's dedication to his business, something I never expected hearing genuinely. I watched them slowly finding common ground, understanding respect could exist even across vastly different life paths chosen. Lily eventually met her grandfather properly, curious and cautious, warming slowly as consistent visits replaced years of absence. My father began attending her school events occasionally, sitting quietly in the back, learning patience he never previously possessed. I noticed him changing gradually, becoming someone who listened more and lectured less during our increasingly regular visits. The company itself stabilized under new oversight, employees regaining confidence as transparency replaced years of quiet financial uncertainty. I never forgot the 10 years of silence, but I chose not to let bitterness define our entire future. My father eventually admitted, during a quiet dinner, that losing me taught him lessons his success never could teach. He said watching me build a genuine life without his approval finally revealed how empty his old priorities truly were. I told him I forgave him, not because he deserved automatic forgiveness, but because carrying anger indefinitely exhausted me completely. Daniel and my father developed an unexpected friendship, bonding over shared appreciation for hard, honest, meaningful work. I often thought about my grandfather, grateful he had quietly protected my future long before I understood its importance. His foresight had given me leverage not for revenge, but for genuine accountability and lasting, meaningful family change. 2 years after that difficult boardroom meeting, my father walked Lily through his old office, sharing stories, laughing warmly. I watched them together, understanding healing sometimes arrives slowly, built through consistent effort rather than sudden, dramatic transformation. The company thrived under transparent leadership, employees secure, families protected, legacy finally built on integrity instead of appearances. I realized true status was never about wealth, reputation, or approval, but about honesty, love, and genuine human connection. My father attended Lily's next birthday party, bringing a handmade gift instead of an expensive, impersonal purchase present. That small gesture meant more than any inheritance he could have offered during our years of painful, guarded distance. I thought back to that cold night he disowned me, realizing how much both of us had ultimately transformed. Daniel reminded me often that our happiness never depended on approval, though reconciliation still brought unexpected, meaningful peace. I began inviting my father to Sunday dinners, small gatherings filled with laughter neither of us once thought possible. He arrived early each time, helping set the table, learning small domestic gestures his old life never required. Watching him kneel down, helping Lily with a puzzle, I finally understood forgiveness as an ongoing, evolving process. My grandfather's trust had protected more than shares. It had protected the possibility of eventual, genuine family healing. I told my father one evening that I was proud of the changes he continued making consistently over time. He said he was equally proud, finally, of the life I built entirely on my own determined terms. 10 years of silence had once felt permanent, yet love, patience, and accountability slowly rebuilt what pride once destroyed. I no longer needed his approval, but receiving genuine respect felt like healing wounds I carried for far too long. Standing in my garden one evening, watching my father teach Lily to identify different flowers, I finally felt complete. This story was never about revenge. It was about protecting integrity, choosing honesty, and allowing genuine change room to grow. My father's company survived because of accountability, but our family survived because both of us finally chose humility. I learned that status built on judgment eventually crumbles, while love built on acceptance continues strengthening through every difficulty. Daniel often says our family's greatest achievement was not signing papers, but rebuilding trust brick by patient brick. I still remember my grandfather's quiet wisdom, protecting my future long before anyone understood how necessary that protection would become. Today, my father calls regularly, not out of obligation, but out of genuine desire to remain present in our lives. I forgave him fully, not forgetting the pain, but refusing to let that pain control my future happiness anymore. Our family gatherings now include laughter, honesty, and the kind of connection status alone could never have provided. I look at Lily, growing up surrounded by love from both sides of a family, finally choosing unity over pride. Sometimes the most powerful justice is not punishment, but watching someone genuinely transform through humility and honest accountability. My father once believed status defined worth, but he eventually learned love and integrity mattered infinitely more than appearances. I closed that painful chapter not with anger, but with hard-earned peace, gratitude, and quiet, lasting hope. And whenever I sign my name today, I remember it once meant rejection, but now it represents genuine, rebuilt family strength.